Thank you all for participating on this webinar call today. We, Campbell, are excited to present the Campbell Education Series 2021. The title of our topic today is Funding Needed Capital Improvements Inside of the Current Municipal Budget. I'm excited about our speaker, Joe Soko, who's also partnered with ABM and also Campbell. And here's a quick bio on his background before we get started. Joe Soko works to help local governments in reducing their energy consumption and carbon footprint. By reducing energy consumption, Joe helps to lower costs to each municipality, which can be used towards the bottom line, or the savings can be used to upgrade facilities. Within his 4 years of experience with ABM, Joe has led development and financial modeling for various municipalities in Ohio, totaling $25 million in funding for needed capital improvements. This year is Campbell's first year in providing these educational seminars in many different facets. What we like to try to do as we do these webinars is make it very interactive. So there's a couple of ways that we can make this interactive. Number one, I think Joe wants to engage you in conversation. That can be done through the chat box, which I will monitor. Also, that can be done just by speaking out in regards to any questions, concerns that you might have, or something that just might be more customized for your location. The other piece of this is I will follow with each of you after the call today to see if we can maybe take a deeper dive into what works for your municipality, because each of you municipalities have different unique situations that you have going on that I think ABM and Campbell can help you with. At this time, Joe, I'll let you go ahead and take over.
All right, I appreciate that, Alex. And I've got some information to share here. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll echo what Alex said, which is, feel free to interrupt me. If there's, I don't know if there's a hand raise feature that we have, but definitely use the chat box. If there's any questions or something you'd like me to dive a little bit further into, maybe a further clarification, be more than happy to do that. And, for the purposes of the information that I'll be sharing today, this is going to be pretty conceptual. We'll get into, some maybe alternative methods of funding capital improvements. I'm going to touch on positioning those rescue dollars that I think everyone's still waiting to hear from the state as far as how they can be used. I think everyone may have an idea as far as the amount of funding they're going to be getting from there, but just maybe some food for thought as far as how those funds could be utilized. And I'll get into that in a little bit as well. I guess first, you may not have, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with ABM, Campbell, and ABM and Campbell, we're sister companies. So ABM, I'm based out of Columbus, Ohio. We're a large multinational company. We've got a lot of resources that help us deliver these types of programs and provide a lot of services to municipalities, but we can also provide these through our local partners like Campbell to give local touch, and we're not going anywhere. But as far as what we'll be talking about today, it's kind of on the left side of this screen: facility engineering, HVAC, mechanical, energy related, and I'll get into a little bit deeper as far as how we're leveraging some of those capabilities. But I guess it's just important to know, we're a facilities company. We're not a manufacturer of anything. We're looking for the opportunity to help municipalities function as efficiently as possible, and not just with the goal of functioning efficiently as possible, but utilizing that and leveraging that to help achieve some of the goals, specific goals that you may have. They may be on your wish list of capital improvements or something else you're trying to accomplish with maybe health of the general fund. And we can dive into the specifics, as Alex said, maybe offline, but for the purposes of what we'll be talking about, I'll be a little bit higher level. And, I'd like to do a key takeaway slide. This is kind of an agenda slide, but, what I would say here is, if I do my job well, sharing this information with you, there's a couple of things you're going to be able to take away here. The first being, your existing buildings, facility, your existing infrastructure, and the budget around supporting that infrastructure can be an additional source of revenue. So we're going to look at something that's a little bit non-traditional as far as how you can achieve some capital improvements. That'll be in addition to the rescue dollars. Additionally, you may have some items that are some capital assets that are potential risk on your budget, something that could fail at a moment's notice, and you'd have to find a way to replace that if it's a needed infrastructure item. So I want to share with you how we can help reduce that. We call it capital risk exposure, things that are at risk of failing that you can't go without. That could be a water, wastewater plant. It could be something within your municipal courthouse or city hall or whatever it may be, a fire station, something that you can't go without. And then also, and this is kind of touching on the rescue dollars here, and I'll go into a little more detail, but how can you structure this if maybe general fund relief or general fund health is something that you're looking at as far as how can we address a healthier general fund. I'll give you an example as far as how this program can really leverage some of those rescue dollars and impact the general fund in a positive light. And the most important thing here, I would say, is some of the examples I'll show you today, and I'll point this out, but the results being guaranteed. We'll get into repurposing some dollars, some savings to fund capital improvements. Those are guaranteed dollars. We'll come back and measure and verify that what's been promised has been achieved. And if we fall short financially, we'll write checks for the difference. And I'll get into a little bit of details there. But guaranteed program and shifting risk away from our municipal clients. So I'll get into, hopefully be able to touch on those 4 points. And again, if you've got a question, feel free to speak up, or Alex is monitoring the chat box, and we'll keep moving forward. So, this graphic here, this is kind of like to set the stage a little bit as far as what we're trying to provide. If you were to look at this green line, resource demands, that may fall anything that's on your wish list. It can be capital related. It may be, you're looking for more safety services that you can provide your community, road improvements, whatever it may be. There's a lot of things that fall onto that green line for demand and resources. And more often than not, with municipalities, specifically in Ohio, those revenues, it doesn't line up. And as we've gone out into the future, we've seen a lot of municipalities, especially after the start of the pandemic, revenues going down, or at least uncertainty with where those revenues are going to come in at. I think things may be changing a little bit. The landscape may be changing a little bit with these rescue dollars from the latest stimulus package. But nonetheless, there's this gap. And even if you do have those rescue dollars, what should you be funding inside that gap? The gap of your wants and needs and the revenues to support those wants and needs. And I'm going to show you some examples here as far as identifying what specific items are in that gap and what benefits you may have in identifying and addressing certain capital improvements that could have a return on investment or a positive financial impact for those dollars invested in capital assets. And I'll get into a little bit further of what I mean here. And I guess going on to the next slide here, feel free to, if you've got something on your wish list, maybe this isn't a question, but if you got something on your wish list, feel free to pop it into the chat box. And maybe we can make these examples a little bit more relevant for you folks that are joining us today. But I would tell you, what we see, as far as that wish list of capital improvements, usually something around the community, maybe something that your constituents are really asking for. But it could also be newer technology, something related to water, wastewater, the treatment plants themselves, the distribution. Those are very hot topics right now, if that's a service that you're providing to your community. And, and lastly, HVAC ventilation. That's a critical area that we're seeing right now, not just from the standpoint of, hey, we've got older assets in our HVAC ventilation and we're going to need to replace those. But, how do we replace those? How do we make that financially happen? And what can we put in place with those new ventilation systems, how do we structure those, or what solutions do we put in place there so that we're getting clean air filtered into the buildings? And that's been something that's really important from the standpoint of, moving forward out of the pandemic. And also, if something like this were to happen again in the future, how are you prepared for it so that you can continue to operate and continue to make sure that the individuals that are in those facilities are safe, so that you can continue providing services to your constituents and to the community. So I'll pause, and I'm not sure if we have anything in the chat box, Alex, if there's any items that we can touch on as far as top of the wish list. If not, we can keep going, but I'll pause for you right now.
In the chat box, but at this time, if someone wants to just chime in, feel free. If not, I guess we'll keep going.
Yeah, feel free at any time, and we can share some examples as far as how we may be able to address that within this program. And diving in a little bit further here, if we're talking about, we've got some items identified on that wish list, or critical items that need to be addressed within the capital infrastructure of the city. What are some ways of doing that? And the traditional idea of, you have a capital improvement fund, and you allocate dollars each year to addressing some of the things that are in most need, and you're not always addressing everything that's in need. This is an alternative avenue that you can take to getting some things additionally completed in addition to what's currently being allocated in that capital improvement fund. And so I know it's riveting talking about the Ohio Revised Code, but I put the specific sections of the Ohio Revised Code on here for you. For cities, ORC 71702, counties 307041. These are mirroredly the same type of legislation, and it allows you to utilize an additional funding source for completing capital improvements. So the idea with this legislation being offered to the municipalities in Ohio is, you may have capital needs, and specifically capital needs that are nearing their end of life. And if you were to replace those needs, they would result in savings. And I'll give you an example. You have maybe a 30-year-old or older, even maybe, boiler in your city hall. And eventually that thing's on its last leg, and you're eventually going to have to replace it. Now, you also realize it's probably not the most energy efficient item out there, but holding off some money in the general fund or the capital improvement fund, because it's working, it's still operating. Now, every year that you fire up the boiler, there's going to be maybe a large maintenance call to get it running. Maybe you have some major repairs each year to try and keep that thing on its last leg so it's still ticking. But as soon as it fails, it's going to need to be replaced. Now, when you replace that item, there's going to be some energy savings there, because you're going to have a newer, efficient boiler. You're going to be able to avoid some of those operational costs that you're currently incurring by major repairs or a part or material here or there to make sure that it's continuing to run, all the while knowing that it's at its end of life expectancy, and you're going to have to address it one way or another. And that would be one item. We could look at boilers. We've done windows, roofs, anything with HVAC, controls, lighting. We've done water meters, things in and out of the water treatment plant that would result in savings. And the idea being, we've done street lights, added street lights, city beautification, security, so that you can go pretty wide as far as utilizing this legislation, this funding source, to get some things completed. But the idea being is, you're spending these dollars either way in your budget. You're going to be spending them on unnecessary, large utility bills than what may be needed to operate the facility. You've got operational expenses as far as keeping those older pieces of equipment up and running. And if we can repurpose those dollars, the dollars that are getting spent a little bit inefficiently, repurpose them so that we can put new capital improvements of already needed improvements into your facilities, you'll be much better for it. Be able to keep the budget neutral. The idea being, there's going to be savings from the energy, operational, maintenance, capital cost avoidance side. So how do we use the dollars you're already spending right now to address those improvements that you're going to have to address either way? And the rub there is you need the information up front to make an educated decision. So the purpose of this legislation is to partner with a firm like ABM, where we would do all of the engineering and design up front. And that's design as far as what's the cost, what are the savings associated with that. And before the city or county decides to make a decision as far as what to include in that improvement program, you know what the savings are going to be. You know what the costs are. These are no change order programs. It's a guaranteed price. If the engineering on the front end was incorrect, then that's a cost that a firm like ABM, if you decide to partner with ABM or a firm like us, that's one that we would have to cover. So the idea is shifting the risk away from the municipalities onto a third party that's going to be qualified to administer this program. So we've done programs that were $1 million or $2 million in magnitude. And I'll give you an example, a case study a little bit later of a city we worked with that did over $8 million of improvements that were all funded through the energy savings, but they couldn't make that decision. They couldn't make that educated decision without the information on the front end. So there's some specifics to the legislation that I won't dive into detail now, but I'd be happy to offline as far as the selection process, the scope inclusion. It allows you to include a lot of different items as long as they're self-funding. And then lastly, the financial outlay. I'll give you a financial example here in the next slide. But if there's debt that is taken on because of this program, typically if there is going to be debt, it would be a bonded debt or a tax-exempt lease purchase. Those pieces of debt under this legislation do not count against the city or county's net indebtedness. And the reason for that being is you're spending the dollars anyways. And I'll give you an example here, but if you were to take out debt for these types of programs, the idea being you'll have an annual debt service payment, and that annual debt service payment would be less than what the guaranteed savings would be for the program. So it's able to keep that budget neutral and still deliver those capital costs or those capital improvements to the municipality. And if we were to look at an example, quantifying funding potential here. So I mentioned, energy and utilities, and then some operational expenses, parts and materials for, keeping something like a boiler or, major repairs if you have a roof and you're continually making patches, or you have major repairs on your HVAC side. Those are all items that can be quantified prior to selecting what the scope is of the program. And so if we were to give you an example and see the annual savings of energy, operational, capital cost avoidance, totaling up to about $283,000. And this is to give you an idea. Typically something that's older, that's energy inefficient, is also going to be operationally inefficient. So there's a little bit of linear, relatedness there as far as the costs are concerned. And there's some other areas that I won't dive into now. We can look at debt refinance, debt wrap, which would increase funding potential. We've looked at IT spending to see how that can be brought down as well and utilize that as a funding source. And if we were to look at a 20-year term, and typically these programs are 15 to 20 years, the idea being we're not going to be implementing anything that has a shorter life expectancy to 15 to 20 years. So each program is very customized for the specific municipality. But if you were to take out a bond or a tax-exempt lease purchase, it would be 15 to 20 years to make sure that anything that was being paid on was still in the facilities or still being utilized when that note was still issued before its term date. But for this example right here, this would allow this city or county a little over $5.5 million of capital funding right now within the current budget. So that's to say that those improvements that would result in these savings here would be able to be addressed up to $5.66 million without increasing the budget at all. And those numbers, when we look at these numbers here, these are guaranteed by the selection in the RFQ process. If you were to select ABM or a firm like ABM, these numbers are guaranteed. It's required in the legislation to come back and measure and verify that these savings have been achieved. And if they weren't, if the actual energy savings were 120,000 instead of 147,000, we would write a check to the municipality for the difference. So $27,000 check. And that's what allows you to stay whole as far as a debt service payment, and make sure that what was promised on the program is actually being delivered. So a little bit of an overview there. And Alex, I'll pause if there's any questions in the chat box, or if someone's got any questions as far as how that funding potential shakes out.
At this time, if you would like to ask some questions, feel free, or you can put it in the chat box.
And if not, I'll keep rolling forward.
You can keep going, Joe.
All right. So what I would say is that an additional part of this program, looking at things holistically, the idea of these types of programs is not simply to pick off as much capital improvements as possible. While that may be a primary goal, focusing solely on that dimension of the program may not be to the municipality's best interest. So what we'll also look at, if you can look at this blue line, there's a couple of other deliverables that we can share with our clients, but we're also looking at a comprehensive capital assessment as far as all the capital items that are at the city's disposal that could fail or could reach their end of life at some point in the next 15 to 20 years. And so what we're looking at here is when you see these spikes in this blue line, that represents a large capital asset in a facility, in a wastewater treatment plant that's expected to fail or reach its end of life expectancy. So that you can see when those items, those large capital items, may come due. And it's important to realize when they may come due and what exactly those items are, so that we can make sure that those are the items that are going to be included in the program as far as addressing the needed capital items. So the goal being to get the projected expenses down to this orange line, keep things at the current budget, utilizing those savings up front so that we can suppress some of these spikes, the budget that you see, some of those risks that you see in the capital volatility out in the future. And if items aren't included in the program, that's fine too. But what the assessment allows you to do is be able to see, maybe this is a large spike out in the future, which is about 10 years out. That may be something you want to include in the program as far as the funding is concerned. But if not, that's something we can provide as far as life expectancy when it should be addressed. And then also the order of magnitude as far as what cost would be associated with that item, so that you can plan outside of this program, outside of this funding model, as far as what needs to be addressed in all of your facilities and all of your infrastructure.
Joe, I got something in the chat box here before we go on to the next. For Campbell in Michigan, just want to make sure it's relevant. Of course, that would be the representative that would be from ABM for Michigan as well. But pretty much everything you're saying today is relevant for what we can do in Michigan as well for that market. Would that be correct?
So the legislation, I mentioned something in the Ohio Revised Code, that allows municipalities in Ohio to complete these programs. Very similar legislation in Michigan that would allow municipalities to complete these programs. It would just be obviously not a part of the Ohio Revised Code. It would be a part of Michigan's state legislation.
Thank you.
All right, Alex, I'm going to keep rolling, and probably, the most important part of, examples, or, it gives a real life example. We completed one of these programs with the city of Fremont up in Sandusky County, the county seat for Sandusky County. And we did our capital volatility analysis, which involved a lot more information than what was on this line chart here. but we completed that, excuse me, we completed that for the city, and we were able to identify, we were able to identify where all the at-risk assets and equipment were, and what the city could expect to need to allocate in their general fund or their capital improvement fund to make sure that those were going to be addressed. And what we were able to do with the program, out of all the guaranteed savings, we were able to address all of the at-risk equipment. So we were able to effectively move that capital volatility, that risk of capital exposure down to zero. And that city, the city of Fremont, was able to do $8.5 million of improvements through the guaranteed funding. We had over $12 million of improvements that they could have completed through the program, but they only did 8.5. They only needed 8.5. So that additional $3.5 million over the 15-year term of the program flows back into the general fund year over year. So that's to say their annual savings are exceeding their annual debt service payment for the program, which is creating that additional general fund relief. And the city of Fremont had a great program. I'm not sure if anyone is from that area up in northern Ohio that's on the call right now, but we did some city beautification. We put new street lights on the State Street Bridge leading into downtown. They've got some nice banners on those now. Those were part of our program. There was additional security upgrades in Municipal Court for the city. So there's access control, new video monitoring that they're able to utilize. So there were a lot of improvements, even outside of some of the needed. There was a lot of need there as far as the capital improvements are concerned. But they were also able to get some items accomplished that were maybe more so on the want list. I could argue that those were maybe on the need list as well. But a great program with the city of Fremont. I can share offline if we talk specifics as far as what your city or county is looking to get completed. We can start to look at some examples of what that may look like for your city or municipality. And I'll go. I've got 2 slides left here, Alex. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the rescue funds and something that we're working with, and this is even nationwide. We complete these programs around the country, and every state's a little bit different, as far as these funds are concerned. So I think in Ohio right now, we're still waiting on guidance as far as what these rescue dollars are going to be either restricted to or required to use those. I think right now, from your allocation, you can expect to get half of that right now, and once those funds are released, and then the other half a year from now. But I would say if you were to look at this program and we were to talk further about this, there would be 2 avenues that you may consider in leveraging this type of program. The first being separating the self-funding items from those rescue dollars. If you have items that are going to pay for themselves with the improvements, and it's going to be fully guaranteed, from a firm like ABM, you can really maximize the amount of capital improvements you can complete. You can use those rescue dollars for all of the improvements that aren't going to pay for themselves, all the improvements that are going to be hard for you to pay for in the future. Capitalize on the rescue dollars right now, but separate some of those items that are still needed to be improved, but can pay for themselves. So if you were to have $4 million in rescue funds, use those $4 million, but we may be able to provide an additional $3 or $4 million of funding that could be provided outside of the rescue dollars that you're looking to use, and really maximizing the amount of work that can get completed for your city. And the second I would tell you is leveraging the rescue funds for general fund relief. And because there's some different regulations and guidance from state to state, certain states where this is possible, what we've been looking at is utilizing these funds to address infrastructure improvements that would result in the savings we've been talking about this program. Now, the key there is knowing what the impact is going to be prior to investment, knowing where the quickest payback items are, where the most energy savings, operational savings lie, and quantifying that. You know, what makes sense, quantifying it from the savings standpoint, quantifying it from the cost standpoint, and what municipalities and even school districts with the ESSER dollars are looking to do right now with some of our clients is pay down those investments with the rescue dollars. And what that allows them to do is, instead of utilizing those annual savings as a way to fund the improvements, they can say, we know we need to do these improvements. We're going to use the rescue dollars to fund those improvements. And now we're going to see a much more financially sustainable general fund or enterprise funds. If you're looking at using that for the water and wastewater plants, we're going to see a much more sustainable general fund or enterprise fund over the next 15 to 20 years, because we know these annual savings are going to create more of a buffer for us. And we think that's what's best to do for our particular situation. So I would tell you, when thinking about how to use those rescue dollars, I would tell you, I'm sure everyone's strategizing right now. I'm sure there's been a lot of talk internally as far as how you best utilize those, and everyone's got some type of plan as far as how those are to be utilized. But I would also tell you, you may see a benefit in looking a little bit further as far as what would the results be of investing those rescue dollars in certain capital improvements. And that's something that we can help with. And I'll leave you with this as far as, a next step. We shared the concept today, and I think what may be of value, if there's any interest, is just talking further as far as what this may look like for your particular situation. And after that, if there's of interest, I would say that the thing to focus on would be this 30-day span, where for complimentary, we would be able to come in and just review some high-level data and information as far as energy spend, current operational spend, and really look to give you a preliminary analysis and quantify the magnitude of funding, while also quantifying the potential cost of the program, to say, does this make sense for your situation? So in those 30 days, we'll look at the data from energy bills, current spend. We'll even get a professional engineer on site to do a cursory walk of the facilities. After looking at the current spend and the size of the facilities we're working with, we can get a professional engineer on site, again, complimentary, to validate and say, hey, there are some potential savings here, and then let's quantify those, where we come back for a fiscal verification, where we say, hey, here's the amount of funding that would be able to be produced through this program, and here's the cost that you may see here, and here's exactly what we would look at, all of the scope items that you may be able to include in this program, and try and paint a little bit of a clearer picture for your particular situation to see if this is of interest. We can talk concepts and how we had a successful program with the city of Fremont, but ultimately every situation is different from municipality to municipality. And if we can paint a little bit clearer picture, that's what we would love to do for you, to provide a little bit of service there. And if there's a value in those results, we can look at the next steps as far as the legislation dictates with the selection process, and then doing a very detailed audit to give you the guaranteed numbers and the guaranteed savings and costs of the program, so that you can make a very informed decision as far as what to include in the program, maybe what to not include in the program, and maximize the capital dollars and the dollars you're spending right now inside of your budget. And I'll leave it at that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide any further details on some of the things that I shared already.
Is there any questions at this time? And as I mentioned earlier on the call, we'll follow with each of the municipalities that are participating on the call today, just to either orchestrate a meeting in regards to taking a deeper dive, because again, each municipality has a different, unique situation that they have going. I know a lot of the municipalities are not having folks come in, but we can also do another Zoom meeting, and that can be customized for that particular municipality that we're trying to target to help out. I think at this time, Joe, we're all good. I appreciate everybody being on the call. And let you get your day back. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.